and it's a really critical part of the governance process for IRWIN. So as a community, we said we wanted to have stronger governance on IRWIN because of the impact that it has on all of the teams. And so this is a pretty critical part of it. And as I was thinking about that this morning, I was reminiscing back to when we first started with IRWIN, right? And some of you were around before IRWIN and remember how painful it was. And to Carlos's statement, right? Like, if you don't do anything, then you just keep doing what you're doing, right? And as a community at that point in time, we were like, we have to do something. It's so challenging, right? And the commitment of all of the people that were part of that first release of IRWIN were so committed to it. There was no sense that we were gonna fail because we just knew how bad it was, right? And so we committed to each other and to the community to get that done. And I remember Craig Morgan, who was the Esri project manager for that at the time, after we went into production, we went live and like, it actually went pretty well, yeah. Right? Like it was like we were sitting by the phones going, oh, and like it worked, right? And I remember Craig telling me that as a senior project manager with Esri, who'd been around for a long time, he told me, he said, this was the highest risk project I've ever been on in my career. And I was like, thank God for not telling me that earlier. I know, but I was like, well, why? I mean, like, in my mind, it was like, there was no reason to fail. We just knew that was the right thing to do, right? And he's like, these integration projects fail. They always fail, and they fail not because of the technology, but they fail because business can't come together and agree on how we're going to exchange data, what's going to be authoritative, what the business rules are, what the definitions are. And I think it's worth stepping back and remembering that we did that. And today it may feel like we don't have to pay as much attention to it, but the reality is it can still fail if we as a community don't continue that level of effort and that level of commitment and engagement with each other and for each other. And so this is my little soapbox before we get started, that as part of this governance process today, it's not just a blasé go, no go, yeah, this is good, we can do this, or maybe we can, or maybe we can't. This is making a commitment to ourselves as a community and to each other. And we want to hold that in the space of honor and respect. And so it's much better for you to say no today than to say yes and not mean it, or yes and know that it's unlikely that you're going to get there. We really want to hold this process today from a governance perspective as an agreement and a commitment that we're all making together. So yeah, that's my soapbox.
I appreciate that, Michelle. It was funny because we actually were talking about this last night. We were talking about the fact that with resources, if resources we would have just given up because it got a little hard. It's taken us 3 years and we're still tweaking it, right? We're still working through it. And the only reason why we're so successful is because of all the folks in this room.
Yep.
For sure. And on the phone, those that cannot be here with us today.
Yeah. Amazing group. So
amazing group as well. Okay. So we wanted to start off with just some expectations, some basic ground rules. Mary, did you want them or do you want me to do them?
Either way.
Okay. We'll tag team all of this with all of the folks on the team. So the first thing we want to talk about is our plan is to time box each topic for about 10 minutes. And if we don't need the entire 10 minutes, great, we'll just move on. There are a couple of our topics though that we've time boxed a little bit larger, and I think the reintegration of final fire reporting data we've time boxed to an hour. And then if we don't achieve a goal, if we don't come to a resolution within those 10 minutes, the IRWIN team, as we're having these conversations, will be scheduling focus calls that need to happen really soon. Because the idea is when we leave here, we're going to be able to dial in the specs, we're going to be able to dial in the business plans, we're going to be able to dial in everything that the teams need to be successful to have them out to you in a very reasonable time after this. Do you have anything else to add to that, David or Mary? Okay.
I guess the only thing I'll add is, like, you know, we'll just have to kind of take a look at focused conversation, but also like how close are we to?
Yeah.
Kind of a gut check of like, do we think that we can accomplish this in like a focused call, or is this something that's going to be like 2, 3, 4, and yeah, are we going to have to kind of reassess?
Yep.
So.
Excellent, perfect. Okay, so our goal is to decide to approve, reject, or future each item. So just because I'm trying to have some fun today, I went to go out and find some paddles, and I couldn't find any paddles, so you each got a little piece of paper. And for those of you on the phone, we'll see if we can try to make this work from distance as well. But as we talk through it, it's going to be a B9, B10, yes, no, with a paddle, interactive. We want to see from folks what the decision space is. So that's your participation that we're going to be sure that we have you on board. If you need, yeah. And I probably should have put B9 or future, but we can go through that as well. So Mary already talked about the next steps identified on those that have loose ends. We want to be really, really clear that we put this out here for everyone. We are a community, right? So if you look at the order that we have it, I have a refined business plan that I've been working on, but I didn't want to send out until we actually landed some of this. Mary's going to have the typical go, no go as we'll walk through each and every item. If you're like, man, Kara, you've got that stuff as low, and this is a huge priority for us, please speak up and we'll move it, right? We'll move it as we can. Mary always gives me a check. She's like, well, hang on. You know, it depends on, you know, we'll have that conversation, how much work it is, if we can actually achieve it. But we're committed as well to supporting the community and what's a priority for them. So that's it. But we'll try to re-rank them as much as possible in those instances. So the other thing we want to talk about is Rochelle touched on it yesterday as far as our documentation and the location of where we're going to put it for the teams. The plan is to put it on the WildfireGov site right now. It seems to me I might not have the proper roles to do what I need to do because I'm not able to. I can put documents in there, but I can't associate them with IRWIN, which has been sort of a challenge. So they're out there somewhere. But we'll get that dialed in for you, and that's where they will be, which will include the data mapping worksheet, integration specs, loose charts, and associated with the business plan, the V9 milestones. You've got some extra stuff there on all of those. Is there anything else? I know we've sent them out via email, but we also don't want you to have to go through your email to find them, that they should be available to you. So Eric is going to keep track of all of the notes during the course of the day. Oh, people have also been asking about integration testing and where we're going to have it.
We were originally planning Boise, but we may have to reconsider given the understanding that it's hard for Cal Fire. There we go. Got it right this time. Sorry. I used to work at a place called California ISO when I lived in California, so it just kind of overlapped. Cal Fire is harder to travel to some states, so we're going to put our heads together following this meeting and try to come up with a good alternative for everybody.
We were actually going to try to put it in California because we had so many California cats that were looking to join, but it doesn't sound like they're going to be able to make it this year. So. Good.
No, with the location.
Thank you. Okay, perfect. That's it. What else? We already talked about the time box of conversations. So I think we're ready to go. I think that's everything. Did I miss anything, Tim?
I think you're good.
All right, very good. All right, so we're going to start off with talking about the Inform integration. And that is our final file reporting and integration, reintegration back into IRWIN. So IRWIN was tasked with bringing the data back, final file reporting data back into IRWIN.
Our top 2 priorities for this sprint cycle.
It's one of the number ones. So with that being said though, each system can decide for themselves what makes the best sense for them and their business needs for how they're going to take the data back. So all of us have been part of these conversations. We put out a poll originally. Mary's gonna bring some of our stuff up. We put out a poll, we gave the community options. Really was looking for some engagement as to what. Yeah, I think that sounds really good. So we put out a poll of which system you represented, and then, here's where the systems that we heard from. I will say that it was fairly notable that in some systems we heard from business and some systems we heard from the development team, which may or may not have represented business, right? I mean, in all honesty. So we have that. One of the big questions that we put out there is how do you want the data back? Which of the following options do you prefer as far as bringing it back in? So Mary always explains it better than I do.
Oh, no, I was just gonna say, I can probably read it better.
Yeah, okay.
So the blue represented there is within the incident record. And then the orange is to be contained in a separate related table. You can't really see it when you put it in a PDF. So just wanted to kind of call that out.
Perfect, very good. And then next, we asked about if the data should be used to update an existing incident record, there are potential triggers to consider, and what would we prefer? So we had IRWIN automatically set the ADS. Extended systems are responsible to see the ADS permission states or to send the ADS permission states when they're ready to have the firefighter or fire reporting data, and a combination of manual and auto trigger. And there's kinds of our results. I will say this. It was an interesting question. It was an interesting exercise because IRWIN is a very passive system, right? IRWIN is here's our standards. We're going to exchange these data elements back and forth. So when we threw that one out there as far as IRWIN automatically setting an ADS, the whole IRWIN team was like, that might not be our best plan. But you can see what the results were from the community. And then we went through this, which we thought was super interesting. I'm not going to go into any detail about this, but just what data elements from the final fire reporting system are required for your business practices, and which ones do you have concerns about. So that's kind of where we started this whole conversation. So from there, the IRWIN team started working on different solutions, different lucid charts as far as how that would work.
One thing we want to caveat too is when we talk about Inform has two separate data sets.
Yes.
It acts as a CAD for current incidents that are ongoing, and then it has final fire reporting. Everything we're really talking about here really drives towards that final fire reporting piece.
It doesn't solve.
And it doesn't solve for the CAD portion of Inform, which will be a future discussion. But all of the polls that we've done on here and all of this discussion we're going to go for today in this topic is to highlight the final fire reporting aspect of Inform reporting.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, I think we should be careful that just because Inform Mobile can create a new incident record doesn't mean it's acting like a CAD.
I would just say operational. How's that?
Okay.
It's operational. When we're creating a record, and that's the direction, right? If you don't have a CAD,
If you don't have a
we
CAD,
want you to create it. I mean,
Right.
we as a community want you to create the record in Inform. And if you don't have access to either, then we put some language in, and PJ even helped me with the language that we put into the National Mode Guide to say, you work within your organization as to what is the best place. And then just the challenge is, right, that when we receive that data, and there's updates to that data, it doesn't get to any of the operational systems. So we have issues with UNI and IROC, et cetera. We think that's a real separate conversation.
Yeah,
but
I
it
think so
doesn't
too,
need to.
but-
It doesn't need to be.
yeah, I think that it, it's semantics matter. And so, I mean, reporting an incident and all of the things that
Versus
CADs do are totally different.
Yeah.
So,
Right. I think that's a good point. Okay. Move on to the usage charts.
To the table?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess when we got all this information back from the community. Thank you to those that participated. That was super helpful. And then, we are governed by the DMC, and then of course our leadership within Office of Wildland Fire, because we're an Office of Wildland Fire sponsored project. And so we took the information to them and said, what do you think? What do you think is the best path forward? So go ahead, Mary. Is that big enough? Can everybody see?
Yeah, I'm like, I don't know if I can show all of the options at the same time and have people read it. So maybe I'll just kind of zoom in and just scroll if that works for everyone. I'm working off a small screen as well. So I guess we just kind of put together, based on not only the, results of some of the feedback we've gotten, just kind of like all potential options, whether or not they're like completely feasible or on the table or not, just to kind of outline, where we're at. Option number one is kind of how it previously functioned of, inform, writing back to the incident record as it had previously, just to kind of get a little bit of baseline of how these differ. It's not necessarily something feasible for us, but that is just something we wanted to kind of put out there as kind of how these other options shook out. The second option is, once Inform certifies an incident, IRWIN would update the incident with the final fire report data. So really we would be looking to, like, Inform would be writing to a separate table that we would be reading. Once we see that it's certified, IRWIN would then move that data over and update the incident record directly. And to kind of show the differences between these options, talk about, what the ADS permission state would move to at that point. At that point, that would be certified. The ADS permission state is going to be set by IRWIN, but kind of, looking to the final fire reporting system data to make that change, right? The data process is automatic, so IRWIN would be doing that automatically. The location would be within the incident record itself. That timing would be at certification. And then we have on the side here kind of what those estimated level of efforts are. For IRWIN, a lot of these are high or very high just because there's going to be a lot of reconfiguration that we're going to have to do internally that may or may not impact the systems connected. And to clarify, I think we kind of fine-tuned this column a little bit. The estimated extended community level of effort to implement. So if you do nothing, like if this isn't something that you're necessarily concerned about, for example, maybe our qualification systems may not necessarily interact with the incident data this way. So wanted to kind of make that clarification. They're not going to have any level of effort. But if you wanted to implement this, what kind of changes would you have to do today in order to deal with that? And for this one, it's low because it's just the data is going to be accepted how it is unless you want to read it back, which that's kind of your system's prerogative, I guess, at that point. Should I just keep going?
Yep.
Okay.
If anybody has any thoughts or
feel
questions,
free
or it
shout it out.
Yeah.
And I can't see raised hands on my screen, so if somebody sees them online raising their hands, just.
I was trying to see raised hands. I pressed the button.
Okay, so the next option here is kind of that, where we're talking about that kind of manual option we're talking about, where the extended system would be responsible to set the ADS permission state to fire reporting when they are ready to receive that final fire reporting data back into the incidents table. So at that point, the incident moves to fire reporting. the originating connecting system would be the ones signaling that. Let me scroll up. So they'll be setting that ADS permission state. The data process is that IRWIN would take that as the signal to automatically move that data over to the incidents table and update the incident record once that ADS is updated. And that timing is basically put in the hands of the connected system. So for that, the level of effort for IRWIN is still high. And we said, in order to implement probably medium low for folks who don't currently set the ADS permission state, that may be a consideration in order to implement that, or any type of, back, those types of things. So it's a little bit higher effort than, just IRWIN looking at certified records and bringing that over.
Yeah, so of course, all the read-write systems currently don't ever set that, so that would be a lift for them.
So the next option is looking at kind of that auto trigger option, but auto in the sense that it's IRWIN would be looking at the incident record for a certain set of conditions in order to say, hey, this looks like it's ready for fire reporting data. That specific criteria could very well change. Could be things like fire discovery or containment date time or fire out date time. Hasn't been any type of condition, which inherently gets complicated, right? So I guess that's just kind of the point I want to make there is like if you set a bunch of different conditions, that can get pretty complicated. But at that point, the incident would automatically move to fire reporting, which would be set by IRWIN. That automatic process of bringing the data over would happen automatically, just like option 2, where we're looking at the certified signal. We're going to update the incident record when those incident parameters are met. And we're saying that that IRWIN level of effort is higher in this instance because of the complications of having like several sets of conditions to try to meet that and make that maybe a little bit complicated.
Yeah, we would then be the point of contact for any types of issues or problems that occur from that data being transitioned from Inform then into the broader community, because we would be controlling that switch, right? So that's why one of the other reasons we'd probably have to look into probably increasing the team size for IRWIN to account for that.
Yeah, well, and then I think on top of that too, it's just a matter of then getting to that next level and not to get too far into it, the complication of like, what if people are changing things, making sure that we don't get in a weird loop of, things keep updating. Now we're going to bring that data up and now those types of things. So just wanted to kind of make that distinction and why we made that very high. But probably still that same estimated level of effort to implement from the extended systems. And then this 5th option here is, extended systems would be responsible to set that ADS permission state to fire reporting, kind of bringing in that manual option, but also have kind of a secondary automatic trigger option that's more based on time. 3 months, this record hasn't been modified is kind of the example. Don't know if that's what we would necessarily go with, but if nobody's touched that record in 3 months, okay, it seems like folks are done with this in the operational state, then we can then move that data over to this record. So once again, that incident moves to the fire reporting state. IRWIN and the originating connecting systems would both have the ability to signal or bring that data over. It's in the incident record. That's still a very high level of effort for IRWIN because that's 2 different things that we've got to manage there as well. Probably not as complicated in terms of what the automatic trigger is looking for, but still just two processes that we would have to handle. And we're estimating that's probably a similar level of effort for the extended community as And then our final option here is, kind of bringing it, or that option of keeping it that separate related table survey that we had. So IRWIN creates that informed table, which probably would still exist in the other options, just as a heads up, but that data would then live there, would contain all that reporting data, and folks could query that as they wanted or as they needed in order to get that final fire report information. Now, I do want to say that, like, even if it lives separately, there could be some things that IRWIN could do, like make some convenience queries, like, how we have, like, include relationships on a query for incidents. We could do something similar where it would say, like, include final fire reporting data. That's a little long-winded, but you know what I mean. And then in that same query, you could get that data, and then your system could do whatever you wanted to do with it, however you want to display it to your user, et cetera. So that would be, as set by connected systems, like the EDS permission state would be whatever you had it set to. And the data would be in a separate table. Anytime Inform updates that data or shares that with us, or however we're going to get that data in that table, it'll be updated.
Anytime.
Yeah. So it'll be just kind of that, whatever they send to us. But probably the level of effort in that case is probably a little bit lower for IRWIN because we're not complicating things with bringing data over, overwriting, stuff in the incident record, managing triggers, those types of things. But it probably brings the level of effort for the extended systems a little bit higher if they say, hey, I want that data. Now I've got to modify my query, or I've got to modify my UI to accommodate for that. So yeah, those are our options and kind of how we laid it out. I probably spent too much time on that.
No, I think it's really good.
Jill had a question.
And so it's what's to prevent another application from branching out on its own and disrupting final fire data from coming back to IRWIN, or is it a non-issue? Unpack that a little bit more for me.
Well, when we started several years ago, the idea was that IRWIN was going to be a source that you could go to and have the final information. Then it all kind of moved to Inform, and then Inform changed their system somewhat, so that only Inform had final data, but they had several different flavors of the final data based on wherever it was in the system. So how is basically this effort of here is to bring IRWIN back to receiving the final data so that people can go to IRWIN and get it, right?
So systems can go based on their business need.
Okay.
So there might be a system that doesn't have a business need to see those kinds of updates. And then there might be a system that wants to separate it out where they show their users, well, here's all of our operational data, but we know you have a need to see the final data, and they have a choice to display it to their users as final. And each system, however they want to do it, have that opportunity. I know when I reference other systems and I can see where they have like an activities table where you can see everything that's happened or changed within their system over the course of the incident, so they can kind of retrace the steps of the evolution of it. So do think there might be a conversation amongst the business folks within each system of, well, would it make sense for us to just tell people our stuff is just operational, or this is the operational piece and this is the final piece, or whatever works for their system. So I think that's the key where we're trying to be in the IRWIN team is we'll get you the data and it's your choice as to how to do it.
Yeah, and you may decide, I only need, like, when we go back, or when we looked at what systems said they needed what fields from final fire reporting, not all systems need the same fields, and on top of that, not all systems wanted the fields at the same time. So rather than just forcing it back into IRWIN and saying it's just gonna update what was there, this allows each of the applications, as Kara said, to have those business discussions, and then they can work with their developers to point to the information at the right time that's convenient for them in their system, so that they have that information. It is kind of separated as operational versus final fire reporting, but we also understand the community that some systems are designed to need that information to function correctly. I know WFDIS was one of the systems that highlighted that throughout the whole excursion of Inform leaving IRWIN. So understanding that, we didn't want to force it on everybody, but we wanted to make it accessible to everybody as they need it in their systems.
And there are some that don't want to keep it separated, that they can just like, we want to see every update. So I don't know that we answered your question though, because I don't know in that regard. So there is still the concept that if a final fire data is certified or complete, that information would come to the system. Systems historically have, maybe grayed out, like, hey, this is done. So if any edit you make here isn't going anywhere, and some of them don't allow their users to do it. But if they were to keep it separate, they can continue to make whatever updates they want, just knowing it was no longer. Exactly, it'll feed through IRWIN, but then it'll come back in with the final update.
Because the way, if we do it the separate table way, if you make any changes in your system or any system connected to IRWIN outside of Inform, those changes would not be made to the Inform final fire reporting table that we would build into IRWIN. They would happen internal to all the other systems, but the Inform data that's being ingested from Inform back to this table would only show what's in Inform. So if anybody wants the data in the final fire reporting information to change, they would have to contact someone with Inform permissions that could decertify that record and then make those changes in the final fire reporting system that would then update the table, and then it would update to anybody who connects to those specific categories in that table. So nothing done in IRWIN should ever affect what's being done in the final fire reporting system for Inform once a record's certified or finalized, once they've started working on it in Inform.
And the systems may or may not see the business need to see certified data. Okay, so the next question is, where does the fodder come into this discussion? Unpack that for us too. We're asking, that's part of the update would include the IRWIN ID and a space for the fodder GUID. It's critical when we start to look at things like relationships. And if there was a discrepancy between the two records, having that fodder available and linked up with an IRWIN ID would help a system maybe explain, again, be able to track the history of the record. That yes, even though it says some of these data elements are different in one place and some of these data elements are different in the other, this is actually the same record. Is that kind of what you mean? Is that what you're looking for? You think, okay, we can keep going on that. I will say this though, go ahead.
Oh, no, go. Just want my hand up.
Part of the conversation of the fodder and associated with the standard that's out for review for record data exchange, I'm looking at Rochelle, is that we as a community have discussed timing on standards, right? And so if we have a standard we haven't said this is the cutoff date, but we have a standard that's a little bit later in the year when we're full on in final coding for a system, right? The expectation of being able to implement it for this following year, since it's not out yet, there's no expectation of that. There would be an expectation of working that way, but there would be no expectation that, okay, last minute systems need to add a value for the fodder fluid, right?
Right.
Yeah, so I think no matter how we look at that, there's gonna be some phased implementation to this whole conversation. And we just need to understand what each and every system plans to do so we can better support you and vice versa. And expectations, just to see if there's some roadblocks in there that we need to navigate.
All right, Tim, you had a question?
I did. As systems come online for fire reporting, I can only see that as an eventuality. Are we going to have ADS permission states for individual systems, or is it going to be fire reporting? Is question number one. And question number two, what are you going to do when you have multiple interested parties reporting on a single incident?
Like we do already.
Yeah.
Like we do already. Or where we have fires that are in multiple jurisdictions that have, point of origin in one, but yet they're each, where the fire is moved into, has additional reporting responsibilities for another agency, let's say.
Mhm.
Or like they've been merged and informed.
Or they've been merged and informed.
Yeah, my inclination in that, like, I definitely would want to have some more conversations about it, right? But I think that, that when we think about fire reporting, that's kind of an after the event kind of thing, right? Like we can talk about, and we've talked about that, like there's data that supports operations, so it needs to be synchronized and highly responsive and high performance and all that, right? And then kind of like when you get to that after action reporting, you have a little more breathing space, right? To kind of work through some things. And that's been part of the challenge that we've had with Inform and IRWIN's purpose all along. And my inclination is to say I want to lean towards Inform helping solve those issues, like data coming in from a new fire reporting system that a state might have, for example, because the feds are all on Inform. So if a state has a final fire reporting system and they want to send that data through IRWIN, I would still like lean on having the resolutions, the deconflictions, and the splicing that Inform does, like happen there, rather than in IRWIN. But I mean, I'm not committed to that, but I think I want to make sure that the Inform team was really involved in any of those types of discussions when it comes to the final fire reporting side of things.
But I think his point is a valid point in that, so it's a CAL FIRE record.
Yeah.
It's a CAL FIRE record. We were looking at one the other day, right? It was a CAL FIRE record, and I think there was 8/10 acre that was VIA, and there was 35,000 acres that were CAL.
Right.
And so that final fire report, absolutely valid for the federal agency and what they needed to do, but there was some impact or possible impact downstream in this relationship. So I almost think it's more of a final fire reporting, and I don't think it's Inform. I
think it's a fire reporting subcommittee discussion that talks about how we handle that data, because the thing is, even though Inform's objective is a single report per ignition, right? I mean, that's the ultimate goal. We still have these mindsets in various parts of our agencies that if we want to tell the story about something that happened on us, whether it originated on our land or not, that we have to do a fire report to do that. And this historical use of fire reports to say we had something occur on lands that we were responsible for, or we sent some resources to somebody else's event, right? Those are reasons that we've done fire reports in the past that are still kind of entrenched in our culture to some extent. And so it's a leap of faith for VIA to be able to say,
Yeah.
We don't have to do a separate fire report if we want to be able to report that some of our land burned. We have a way of doing that now without creating an individual fire report. And I think that's a part of a cultural shift that we're going through, and that's going to just take time, and we have to keep having these conversations so that BIA can trust that that CAL FIRE report accounts for the land that their land that burned, and they can get to that data, and that our resource ordering system and the information that comes from our CAD systems can also say, yes, this Park Service resource was used on this Forest Service fire, right? Without having to do another fire report.
Well,
And so,
to be honest, I think that is such the beauty of acreage by ownership.
right,
I mean, that is just like, oh, that is out there and available. And I know that Texas worked through this as well, because fire response does have a final fire reporting system in it, and they've certified their record, that it can almost be recertified, right? And so they've had to do some work, and I still point it done. So Greg's on the line, and I'll look at fire response and how to figure out a way to handle that too. So I think it's those who come forward, I think are pretty good assets.
the other thing I'm gonna put out there, just for consideration, is I think it's worth asking ourselves, because I'm constantly asking myself this. This is an issue that's not going to be as significant when we have IDME. Because I think that part of what we're trying to figure out with this is like, how do we get to that data that lets us understand the story of this incident, right? Whether it's from the land management perspective or the resource perspective. And IRWIN has been our primary tool for being able to consolidate that data. And I'm just constantly watching for, is this a place that IDME is actually going to move us further forward and help solve these problems in a way that we're having to really like shoehorn right now because of the way our systems operate. And I just want us to, I mean, I'm not saying this is the case, but I'm just saying I do think we need to start asking ourselves these questions. If this is really painful and we're really struggling with it and we really haven't been able to come up with a super awesome solution that everybody's like, oh, thank you, yes, that feels great. Maybe we need to start looking at other ways to solve it, and maybe IDME is part of that. And making that those transformations at a different level than in the data sets that we're trying to use to keep operational systems synchronized. So just kind of keep that in the back of your mind as we're talking through some of this today, that that maybe BIA, if we have IDME, will be more comfortable running some some analysis that consolidates that data in a way that they don't have to think IRWIN has to do it, or even, I mean, Koran probably is the best place for it, but just kind of think about that, because that's kind of been in my head.
We just want to be really respectful of the state's final fire reporting systems.
We do want to be respectful of the state's final fire reporting systems, and that's why I think IDME might, like, it's something that we're going to have to kind of start navigating. I think Inform is pretty solid for the feds now, right? We're pretty comfortable with where that's at, and how the states are interacting with it is going to vary, and we're going to have to work through that. And I just want to say, we don't have to force everything into Inform or into an IRWIN structure, but maybe IDME can help with some of that, and we can put some controls on it that says, gives additional information. So just want to get that out there.
Just forgive my naivete, your IDME, I'm not sure.
The interagency data management environment that we talked about on Monday, or on Tuesday, that architecture and then that capability that those proof of concepts that we demoed, that's the IDME concept of being able to provide that lake house and that marketplace and those data products and do those transformations. So
thank you.
Yeah, no, I know, I'm sure, I like a fire hose on Tuesday.
Next question.
Of the IDME.
No, just
Tips,
tips.
ADS permission states for each system with fire reporting. What about multiple jurisdictions? I need to schedule a meeting. Informed help solve multiple jurisdictions.
That's not really our deal, that's
Yeah.
our reporting deal, but yeah. Okay, so we just want to move on. So
There was another comment here.
there's a lot, but they're all really specific to
very
final fire
specific
reporting.
to final fire reporting from the Inform team, and I think they all have great points, but it's kind of a separate discussion outside of how we reintegrate data back into IRWIN. And that comes from my Inform and IRWIN project manager heads, right? So, yes, so these are the courses of action or concepts that we presented to leadership the other day or last week. And as kind of we discussed already, the path forward that we've chosen at this point in time is that bottom
Not
path.
that we've chosen.
Not that the leadership, that we presented to leadership is that bottom option that reintegrates it back into IRWIN in that separate table, then allows the various connected systems within the community to pull that data back at their leisure, at the time that best suits them, and if they actually want that data or not.
Now thoughts.
Yes. Now, that's the path that we, at this point in time, have been directed to proceed forward with, but wanted to bring that back to the community to get your guys' input on that in this
Somebody
forum.
has a massive concern or something that strikes them right now, or. Hoping to pull people back over into this part of the conversation.
Yeah.
I do think one point I'll just make from a technical perspective is that this option is probably the base of all other options. So it's, if we decide that, and based on how this conversation goes, we're gonna move forward with creating a separate table regardless for us to either have our right to, or for us to put that data in, transform it to whatever of those other options. So if we don't come to like a consensus on things, that's almost like the first step, at least to get us moving, right? So.
Sounds like we have unanimous consent.
Well,
I don't know.
I'm
We're getting a lot of
Well,
messages
they're having
coming.
they're having a separate
They're
conversation.
talking about something totally unrelated.
Okay, yeah.
So I'm looking at Chris Buzo.
And this choice that we're going with is the most technically impactful to both IRWIN and banking applications.
So I would say not the most technically impactful for IRWIN of the options, but it would be the most technical option for the connected systems, because they would have to have their developers code into each, like, okay, we want these 4 elements at this specific time. They would have to have their developers go in and actually change the location of when they're getting a specific data set and at what time. But it then allows the systems to tailor what data they're getting back into their system versus just taking all of the data at a specific time.
And I'll point out too that like, if this option, I think if you do nothing, it's the same as it works in version 8 of IRWIN, right? Like if you don't want the data, you don't have to do anything.
Yeah,
Nothing
so-
should necessarily.
So when we say most impactful to the connected systems, it depends on how much of the informed data that connected system wants, right? If the connected systems have no interest in informed data, then this is the least impactful for anything because they don't have to do anything. If they only want 1 or 2 elements, then it wouldn't be that big of an impact. But if they want everything that Inform has, then it would be a very high lift, right? Because they would have to code every single one of those elements for a specific time.
Most systems don't have all the things.
Well, I know, I'm just kind of.
But,
Yeah. Big.
So, I think Jen has a good question in here.
Yeah, and while you read that, one of the things that we talked about is that IRWIN has been designed as a passive system. And some of these options that we laid out would move IRWIN from being a passive system to an active system. And that is a really big shift both technically and philosophically. And so to move a data integration system into a system that is actively changing data, that was really these options where IRWIN would be acting. We just were really hesitant to do that. And I would just be concerned about what kind of precedent that would set. And part of the success of IRWIN, I think, has been that the control exists within the source systems, and that IRWIN is only passing things, right? It's not changing things. And so that was really why we kind of just very quickly took several of those options out of consideration, because we just didn't really, we really didn't want to move IRWIN into that type of role.
So, so Jen said, Jennifer Humphrey says, you know, I don't love number 6 unless you can tell me now that Wildcat will ingest what exactly they'll ingest, because otherwise we as the community will still consistently be updating those systems. Just a ton of work right now with those. So it's Elise and I right now, and I think Julie might be on as well. I don't think we have any technical folks on from Wildcat.
You need a love over on this side of the room.
No, that's I can't answer right now.
You can't answer it right
Because I
now.
don't have the technical folks on that would need to do the work to make that
To tell us what the
right.
lift
So
would
I
be.
can't say
I
yay
will,
or nay on option 6 right
I will say this, Jennifer, that when the technical folks responded to the survey from Wildcat, they liked the concept of a table where they could bring it in as final fire reporting. So that makes me think that they would bring it in as final fire reporting and separate out the data. But I can't say for sure, just like what Elise said. Yeah, okay, perfect.
But I would only counter that with whether we go with any option with Wildcat ingest.
Right.
Right, so that's not just a point for number 6, that's with, based on past experience with Wildcat, that's with any of the options up there.
Are any of the other cats facing the same issues, or is Wildcat the one?
I think, so we heard from Alturas CAD, same thing that they like the table. They'd like to be able to pull out the data and separate operational and final for their users. Would that be a plan for V9? I don't know that you know yet, right? You're just starting to think about it. And Bozarth is on, right? And I don't want to put you on the spot, Tim, so if you don't.
We are not going to integrate anything in yet. Eventually we want to,
Okay.
but it's not.
And you just let your
anywhere in our
users
plan
know.
yet.
Yeah, you just let your users know this is operational.
Yeah, and I'll go back to the thing that we talked about yesterday. Is for us as an agency, if we have an incident, and if we've got plenty of examples of it where somebody goes in to inform and does a fire report for one of our incidents because it's a state DPA but federal lands.
Yeah.
They go in and say, oh, well, this fire happened in the structure and it changed the base incident type, and now all the other systems except for our CAD are saying it's a structure fire. We're still saying it's a wildland fire. We spent $3 million on this fire, and our emergency response billing units folks come back and say, none of the documents match what is right, and you can't spend $3 million of emergency fund on this. You're gonna eat it out of your local unit budget. And then I get a phone call that says, make all the systems work right.
So the downstream impacts are very significant for some systems, and have those kinds of ripple effects. So fire response is interested in the table as well. Is Noel on for FireWeb?
I don't think I had heard from him, or we had seen from him, but we could definitely check with him. So,
Yes, from a Wildcat perspective, if the other cats are good with option 6, it's really just on us if we take the data in, right? So
Yeah.
that's a discussion we can have.
I think,
with our team.
and I'll put my Wildcat business hat on for a second too. We stood in front of 400 people this spring and they want the data back.
Yes.
They want the data, they want to stop having to do twice the amount of work that they've had to do because of this. And so a solution where it at least is presented to them, I think would meet their need. And I think we talked about it on NICADS for one of our calls and they were okay with it. They liked they just want the data. They don't care how they get it, they just want the data. Okay. We probably should.
I think we are comfortable with where we're at for Inform at this point in time, so the Inform.
We have 13 minutes left, just so you know.
That's okay, we can finish early, I think. Right, so if we're comfortable with where we're at, we'll mark that down for the team, so the Inform team will, the IRWIN team and the Inform team will actually start working towards this solution. And then actually we can go on to the next subject. No, they have to push back. So the Inform team will have to flip the switch back on the pushback. The table.
Very good, excellent. All right, so,
Do we need to have the yay, nay?
yeah,
Or are we good with
Are we
option
doing-
6 for version 9? Or?
Well, I think this one's for the broader community. If we do it for version 9,
Yeah.
the broader community, the table would be available and they can code into their systems at any point in time.
Just kind of want that, you know,
Yes.
are we all on the same page?
I got a
Same
thumbs
page.
up.
Thumbs up.
Okay.
we got this Wildcat and IROC is what I'm gonna take.
Well, IROC.
Yeah, rocks like that.
There we go.
Okay.
Do we have any WFTS folks on the line?
I thought I saw some.
Morgan's here with Classic.
Okay, and then Rick, WFTS is not on the page yet. What do you mean?
So, I mean, I think this option is probably maybe the biggest lift for us out of all of them. It either means for next gen, either creating a whole new UI section or trying to figure out the logic for when we pull from one and not the other. And I think it's actually more of a lift for Classic because Classic pushes back a lot of those elements. We'd have to come up with the logic of when do we stop trying to push when there's a discrepancy between the incidents table and a final reporting table if it exists. So just at first glance, there's some real landmines there for us.
I appreciate that, Rick, I really do.
Yeah, I mean, I think the challenge of this is that this is, of all of the things that we've tried to do in this Exchange environment, this is the one that there's the most divergent business needs and uses around. And the fact that we've been struggling with this for 2 years just indicates the complexity of it and the challenge in trying to meet multiple use cases and multiple user needs in this environment. And so it
was pretty clear cut when we did the survey that the read writes for old school, right?
Yeah.
For old school and the cloud cycle. So I don't know what to do with that other than to follow up with WFTS.
Yeah, we can follow up with this, and there may be ways that we can
Facilitate it for them.
lessen the burden on their system. But we'll have to get the developers in the room kind of thing and actually work through it. And we may be able to do more on IRWIN's side or just find a way to make it easier for you guys. But we are more than happy to take that time. We'll set up some time with you guys to do that.
And currently you're using Inform Service. It was a question mark.
No, we're not pulling that from any system other than IRWIN.
Oh, okay.
We're having those discussions right now in the next gen development of how we would incorporate the Inform table and what we would, use it for. Like Rick said, we're going to have to probably have a UI for when fires change to that final fire reporting, but how we keep it in sync before that is an open question if we go with number 6.
Well, yeah, we'll be happy following the data summit, set some time aside with you guys and kind of work through that.
Does that sound good, Susan? I mean, I know it didn't sound great, but we'll have those conversations.
Yep.
We appreciate it. Thank you.
No, you betcha.
Go ahead.
Kind of more technical, so transaction table in IRWIN. So if data is not being fed from the info table back into the incidents table, there won't be any transactions. And if you need those transactions recorded, if the new inform table is updated. Does that make sense?
Could you ask one more time?
Oh, I'm asking about the transactional data that's in IRWIN. So every time an update's made to the incidents table, there's a transaction that's recorded. So you can go and see a history of every change that's been made to IRWIN. So in this table, if it doesn't update IRWIN, there won't be a transaction. So should there be transactions for this table?
Yeah.
So that you can see all of the changes that's made to the new inform table?
They still log the changes on that table.
Yeah, you're talking about like kind of like we have a history, like an incident history for the incidents
Yes.
table. We could do one for the inform table.
So would it be a separate one or would it be the same?
Yeah, I think we would want it separate.
Because then when you're pulling reports, like it goes back to IDME, where
And
it's
that's where
gonna
I
play
think
into that.
if they just log them, then we bring all that into IDME and
Right.
like, do all of the transformations and make that available from an analytic perspective. If people wanted to be able to look at those, I wouldn't want the IRWIN to,
Yeah,
but we
so
can keep the
we
table.
could do it.
You'd have the
Sure.
table and the logs.
Yeah, we would have the logs and we would do it similar to how we do
Yeah.
incidents, right? We want to have all that information.
Well,
That'd be
and
good.
people need it all.
Right.
That's the thing.
It has value.
It has a ton of value.
And other than those that are being decertified, certified, there shouldn't be too many
It's almost like phase 2,
coming back.
separation table.
Megan did ask,
Yeah.
does option 6 include only certified data? But I think
So
it's,
option 6 would be any changes that occur in inform would be published to that separate table. So, and that was one of the reasons we were going with this option versus just certified, because there have been some systems who state they need the information even before the record is ever certified. So this option would ingest any changes inform makes.
Yeah, so those things that we've been seeing in 209, right, Megan, with not getting those updates, this would resolve those. That's where you were coming from.
Well,
Perfect.
except for the operational.
It would depend on how they would code their systems for them to see the data.
For inform
Right.
records.
Yeah.
For inform records. Yeah. We'll schedule a follow on that because it's that we're struggling with that a little bit. And it's not massive amount. It's just unfortunately when it's a significant fire, it's an issue. So.
Hey Kara, it's Megan.
Hey lady.
The reason I asked that is like I know we have talked about integrating the SIT for a long time. So I mean in the future, I think the SIT application would only want to read certified data and not have it back and forth. Just for the final fires and acres. And I mean, I'm just spitballing here, but that's why I asked what data was coming back through, if it was operational or certified. So thank you.
And are you thinking sort of like almost a separate, I know we're not there, but a separate year-to-date table? Because that's where the
Yeah.
data would come
Yes,
back.
that's what I'm thinking. And
Perfect.
yeah, just in the future, not for version 9, probably not even version 10, but I was just mulling it over. So thank you.
Thanks, I appreciate the question. Okay.
All right. I think we're in a good space right now. Any final questions before we move on to the next topic?
I'm looking at leadership and our data steward.
Chris, close your eyes.
Okay. Well, I appreciate the conversation, and I hope to have additional conversations, and somebody walks away and they start to talk to their team and they say, wait a second, we didn't think about that. We do want to hear about it because we want to address it, consider it, bring it up. We were talking about, we'll move on to the extended team call next week later, but some of our needs. Okay, next. Number 2.
Yes.
Number 2.
Racing through them.
It's 10:05. Can we do number 2? Might we time box a half an hour?
Yeah, we're good.
And it may not take that long.
We,
It's the
yeah,
learning
we,
portal,
yep,
right?
yep.
Yep.
We want to talk about the learning portal is number 2 on the priorities. For the IRWIN team, we are very well aware that the learning portal conversation primarily impacts, and I keep saying learning portal, I need to say learning management systems, because we're not just talking about one, we're talking about a plethora of learning management systems. And the qualification systems. And then we all get to reap the benefits of having that data exchange back and forth. And those systems that may have a learning management system within them, like I think there's some CADs out there that do have a learning management system within them. Some of this work that we're doing, I think will benefit you as well. So Mary's got all sorts of good stuff, pictures to put up.
Yeah, pictures, things like that. Just kind of wanted to kind of maybe recap what we've done in discovery with like these LMS folks. Yeah, I will zoom in. But bottom line is we talked with, IQS folks, QCS folks, the folks who want that data back, and when they want this learning data back. And essentially, we want to exchange this data or have these learning records at the time of a course being completed at this point. So, the user registers for a class. We could have, integrated, scheduled stuff at this point, but we've identified that that really isn't something, at least for now, that we want back. So as soon as a user completes a class, they get that completion date, they get all their good data back. That's when a learning portal or a learning system would push a learning record to us. And then at that point, qualification system could query at their leisure, however often they'd like, to get that data back. If there's any updates that, basically hasn't changed, yes, then that update would happen from that particular LMS. So it's that's a very high level, very simplified kind of workflow that we have. Let me see if I can zoom out. And we've kind of identified that this would most likely live on a separate API with just a couple of tables at this point. How we would go about storing this information, because we're planning and looking forward to having multiple learning management systems integrated with IRWIN, that we would have a kind of course table, this is kind of big picture, because there may be course codes or titles that are duplicated within different systems. Different states maybe have to use like 800 or something, for example. And then we could have the learning system of record associated with that course. And also if there's courses that start and end, aren't active anymore, we would have kind of knowledge, or be able to kind of track that back of like, oh, this used to be an active course, and now it's not. The key for our qualification systems is that we have this associated with an IRWIN RID, a person actively in IRWIN. So that's really one of the key points for us in this learning record. So you have the course ID that is associated with this course table, and then you have the person that actually took it, and then you have your start and completion date, all that stuff. And the host unit has also been identified. So with all that said, it's not a ton of tables at this point. It doesn't have a lot of complexity necessarily, but we still think because it's something that isn't necessarily directly associated with incidents and resources per se, probably keeping this as a separate API, like I said, and likely won't impact folks that aren't, looking to interact with it. I think the last thing I'll say on that is that IRWIN RID piece and matching what's, the person in IRWIN and the person taking the course is something that we've identified as a process that we're working on. And so we're having further discussions on that. And that's kind of the other key component that we're working out kind of outside of this kind of structure. So I don't know if there's much more to say on that.
I feel like Keith has something to say.
No?
Oh, you
No,
have.
he's like, we talked about
You
this.
had a look on your face.
I've been on all the calls.
He has been on all the calls. They've actually been great calls. And super excited that we're going down this path. It's been a long time coming. Keith called me after the spring summit and said, where is the learning management system? I'm like, oh wait, it's right. Oh, we don't have it on here. So so we've been talking to, I think it's important that we sort of call out, of course, the Wildland Fire Learning Portal, the IAT training, so all the aviation training. They likely won't be able to come on V9. It'd be more of a V10, but they're on all of our calls listening so that they can prepare. Keith's got a gaggle.
ESO.
And then want to include the FEMA. And then it's super important as a critical dependency when we start looking at courses and the course ID, having that in a system of record like Edge. It's a dependency. We have it in our business plan as a dependency. We've got time sensitivity with that, so hoping we can.
I don't know if CAL FIRE knows about this or not, and I don't know
Yes.
if they have a product that they do in training that is a closed environment. Is that a good way to put it? Politically? But a lot of this training that's available, they may not get it. They can get it from different sources. So we talked with another first solution provider, First Do, is that their name?
Yep.
First Do.
First Do.
And they don't have a learning portal, but they have learning records that they maintain. So this information was important for them to be able to get access to, because their students go to FEMA and take the classes, as our federal employees, as state employees, as everybody does, or other things. So they were very interested in gathering that data. Bill from ESL was on the call. I haven't had any follow-up calls with them. I don't know if you've been working with them on integration work and if that has bled over into the training part.
They've sent us a few emails.
Katie.
No, this was Bill with the one at the FTP.
Was that the fire first two?
Yeah, that's what we're talking about.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
Okay, so a lot of interest.
a lot of interest. So it's kind of exciting.
Kind of one of those things that, probably doesn't impact like a lot of folks maybe necessarily here yet, but to raise awareness of like, if we get this started, you have learning systems that you want to integrate. Hopefully we're forging a path that you can follow pretty easily.
So we've created a generation of lazy data enterers.
Yes.
And I know that's kind of funny to say that, but dispatchers used to do a crap load of work that was repetitive. And now they've been spoiled with the spoils of IRWIN doing a lot of that data entry work for them. So a lot of the people who deal with entering fire or training data into profiles, training profiles for individuals is a huge time commitment. And they're looking for a way to get out of that business. So they know that there's an avenue, and that's why they've been pushing for IRWIN. We did have some discussion around the course, and I'm sorry, Mary, if you talked about that for a second, that course table and where it's gonna live and how it interacts. And so there was some discussion and concern about that.
Yeah, so that's, I think was that what we were referring to when we were talking about Edge being a system of record for that course table?
Maybe. I don't think there was any decision, but there were.
Yeah, I have an email I'm gonna shoot over to the training development group or training development committee. And I want DMC to training development committee conversations about, and whoever else we need to involve in starting to think through. I think it's like an authoritative data source discussion and figuring out like where we're gonna house that, whether, so yes, I anticipate conversations this fall with various people.
It would be nice if we all followed the 901-1, but that's not true because everybody has their own flavor of things. Cal Fire has theirs. The California Local Government, CICCS, has their own flavor. The chair has theirs. Forest Service has everybody has their own flavor.
Right.
That they add to stuff. So we're gonna have to be, that's where we start to go. How are we gonna manage this?
Yeah, and that's because of that is why I lean towards Edge being an important part of that solution, because we can have the different courses, but we can define the relationships between them. And so that's, I think that's part of the conversations we need to have.
So out of all that, that was the only part that like, everything else.
Kind of, yeah, and yeah, these are based on the conversations that we've had, and they're probably not, there's still some of that stuff to kind of firm up, but I think that's.
I'm looking forward to the paddle.
Yeah,
I know. Are you ready?
Yeah,
It's set.
I think that's.
Bring on.
If anybody.
This is for the learning.
Anybody on
portal.
from
Voting.
the
Oh,
learning portal? Anybody on, Rick?
Yeah, QCS
woo,
business.
woo, go Marley. I'm picturing you
I
in the
think
paddle.
Rick was busy today, but he's been working with us diligently through all of this.
Jill, did you hear?
Yes. Of course I can, correct.
IRWIN, our ID is the resource ID. That's just a unique identifier for a resource record.
And LRID?
Learning record ID. And those may be subject to change.
Those are brain
Yeah,
thoughts.
yeah. This is just trying to get, some sort of.
We won't even get into the
Pattern.
PTIDs and the CIDs. I'm always like, okay, wait, which one's which?
So overall, yeah, if you aren't participating in the learning record or learning, API of this, it's low or no effort for you. So
Yeah.
I'll assume folks who aren't.
I do want to put out to the group though, that if you have a learning management system within your organization and would like to be included in these calls, we welcome you. So just let us know.
Yeah, no pressure for B9.
No pressure for B9, just,
Does, I don't know, I'm looking at the Techno Silva and.
yeah, that's what I was wondering.
User, do they have a learning portal or training course management inside fire response?
It would be something that would be for sure.
Okay.
You don't do training delivery, but you record training, right?
But you record
We do
it.
both.
Okay, oh, okay, so that,
So this would send it all to IQS for you. I mean, when we talk about the lift, and I think it's, like I said, not everybody would care, but for those training managers out there that he talks about that have become lazy. I mean, we're talking thousands of records every fall, during training season, every fall, every spring. And it's a mind-numbing amount of work to get this to come across for them. So, off topic.
All right, so version 9.
Version 9.
We got
Alright.
that from Marley with IQCS. We got Keith.
We got Rick. I feel like we
Yeah.
can speak for Rick.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I know we don't have, IQCS doesn't have a PM or technical people on today, but they've been heavily involved in these conversations. So, and we're getting very clear direction from our board that this is a high priority for them.
The Lucid charts will be available for those systems, you know, and especially like fire response, which they'll be available. And then of course, if the API would live in the data mapping worksheet, or not the API, but the guidance in the data mapping worksheet. Anything in there or all of the chart?
Yeah, we're starting to build out that kind of information here, where it should be like a learner API, so you know, pretty much how you would expect things to look, and then specs.
Financial boost is
It'll be its own separate document. Yes. It'll be its own separate document. All right, are we at break time?
Oh, we still have 40 minutes until break time.
Nope. No. No, I was in charge, so. At the bottom of the hour, we'll be back at the bottom of the hour. Does that sound good?
10 minutes?
10 minutes?
So I think.
All right, and then we'll jump back into it. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.
Instead of 11.